Growing Up Weird.
Hi, and welcome to Growing Up Weird, the podcast where we explore how the earliest chapters of Western childhoods shape the health stories that we then carry into our adulthoods. Each week, we dig into the newest evidence, understand how it links together, and walk through some of the changes that we in the West could make to give kids decades of better health. Are you ready? Have you got a cup of tea? Good. We begin, as ever, with the news.
Who's going first? Go on if you've got news.
I have got news. A really meaty paper, this one.
Okay, let's have your caramel paper.
Okay, so my paper is a very large meta-analysis published in JAMA Pediatrics by Islam et al. And they were asking the question, what are the major risk factors for the development of food allergy in children and babies and children?
Okay, yeah, big
Classic,
topic.
right? Yes. So this one's really big. It was about 40 different countries, 2.8 million participants. And they looked at a whole range of different variables.
Yep.
And the two that came out, absolutely top, major risk factor, food allergy in children. Have a guess. They're not surprising. One of them isn't, at any rate.
Is it date of introduction of food antigens and diversity of microbiome?
You were right on the first, although it's not the biggest predictor, but delayed introduction of food antigens is certainly a risk factor. So, for example, if you only introduce peanut allergens after the age of 12 months, your child's much more likely to develop a peanut allergy.
Sure.
But the two really big ones, one was atopy in the first year. That means eczema.
Hang on a second. Is that risk factor or is that a symptom?
So not a food allergy. Eczema's not.
No, okay, yes, you're absolutely right.
Eczema is a damaged skin barrier, which enables antigens to cross it. So, yeah, that first year, having eczema in the first year, big predictor of subsequently developing food allergy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the one that I particularly was interested in was that, just for magnitude of risk, you are just under 4 times as likely to develop a food allergy if you had eczema in your first year.
Wow.
But the other point, the slightly more surprising one to me, was that having antibiotics in the first month of life more than quadruples your risk.
Yeah, of course, I shouldn't say that.
Now, it's really clear. We know that, and I suspect actually one is a predictor of the other, which is a predictor of the other, because what we know about how allergy develops is that there is often this kind of cascade, the atopic march, where we start with eczema, we develop food allergy, allergic rhinitis, and then often asthma. But I think what was particularly interesting to me, they looked at, antibiotics within the first month of life, antibiotics within the first year of life, and antibiotics during pregnancy.
Oh, okay.
Which is really interesting, right? Because, hypothetically, we would think that antibiotics at an earlier stage of life in general might make things worse because of how the microbiome is disrupted. But that isn't the case here, and I think we can probably both speculate on why. But if you have antibiotics during pregnancy, your baby has, just to put it in context, I'm making sure I'm using the right percentages. Antibiotics in pregnancy, about 40% higher risk.
Okay.
Antibiotics in first month, about 400% higher risk.
Oh my God.
And antibiotics in first year, again about 40%. So it really does look like that first month, or the early stage of life outside the womb, is so critical to your microbiome development that damaging it in various ways has an enormous impact on your risk of food allergy development.
Yeah, which
it's not surprising.
It's not massively surprising, but those are big numbers. Bigger than I would have said.
Yeah, exactly. And again, to put it in context, if you have a cesarean section, which you often have antibiotics. The mother has antibiotics during labour. Baby doesn't usually. But a cesarean section is only associated with a 16% increased risk of food allergy as compared to baby getting antibiotics in that first month. Yeah, there you go. I thought it was a good paper.
Meaty was exactly the right word.
Yeah.
My word. Okay.
What have you got?
Well, first I should probably point out that we're on the bikes again.
Yeah.
Loud noises aren't things in our living room. That was a bus.
Yeah. I almost went, yeah, but I realised that I shouldn't just squawk at different birds because we're being recorded.
Hey, we saw a raven here yesterday. This
so
is
cool.
a good bit of the ride. Okay, my paper then, and I have limited myself to just one. That's a lie. It was a slow news week. Is by a fellow whose name I keep forgetting, and it's not David Laser, it's David Blazer.
Okay.
From the University of Maryland, who about a week ago published in Nature Communications a paper which drew data from the 10 largest US surveys of childhood.
Okay.
Which have been done at some point in the last 10 years. All 10 of them. One was very recent, the others less recent. That's how order works. And he and his team looked at the expenditure, both public and private, that goes into raising a child.
Okay.
First piece of news out of this is just the headline number, which I find incredible. Do you know the cost of raising an American child to the age of 18? In American dollars, circa 2024?
I have no idea. I don't know.
$502,000 on average. $500,000 on average.
Oh my goodness.
Now,
wow.
Clearly, some of that is personally borne by parents. Yeah?
Okay, yep.
Born by parents again. No, that's kind of just how this works. So roughly 40 to 50% of it is carried by the parent.
Okay.
Parents, plural. The other half roughly being public expenditure on school teachers and stuff like that.
Yeah. But in the US, health or not health?
No, not including health. That's private.
Wow.
So, what is interesting beyond that headline number, which is massive, bigger than you would see in any other place.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that number is that it can then be pulled apart by income quartile and by race. And that's where things get really interesting. Okay, so the interesting thing about that paper is not the overall number, despite that being a nice pub fact. One thing is that there is not a massive difference in investiture between the highest and lowest quartiles of income in the US.
Hang on, let me just make sure I understand this. So you're saying that parents in the top quartile of earnings and in the bottom, they spend about the same, or the state spends about the same?
I'm saying that children of parents who are in those top versus bottom quartiles get about the same amount invested in them.
Huh? Okay.
So, and by about the same amount, there's an $86,000 difference on average between top and bottom quartile over those 18 years.
A lot, but not like loads.
Compared to the 502
total,
that ain't massive. A big part of that is that a lot of it's means tested, government help, etc.
Okay.
But it's interesting to see that that's actually working.
Interesting. Okay.
Individuals can't do a huge amount with that information. So there are two things that you can actually do something with in this paper.
Okay.
One is the biggest time of difference is apparently in early life. That's when poorer families get less investment in kids and richer families get more investment in kids. And what's interesting about that, as you know from this podcast, is that that's when it really hugely massively matters to adulthood health.
Okay.
So things like amount of time spent breastfeeding, amount of ultra-processed food before the age of 5 years old, all of that stuff is included here and picked apart in the paper, which is really interesting.
Fascinating.
And it basically is saying, look, this is when the rich people are kicking your ass.
Yeah.
And if you can spend now and not spend later, it'll be better on average. So that's interesting.
God, that's so hard to say though, without parental leave and without, oh my goodness.
And the paper is kind of aimed at the administration.
Policymakers.
And policymakers, not so much parents.
Yeah.
But there is another interesting thing.
Yeah.
Which is they then pull it apart by race.
Okay.
Looking at Black, Asian American and Pacific Islander.
Okay.
and various other international pieces.
Yeah.
And they say, look, there are cultural elements here,
Okay.
including the fact that both Black and Asian American kids have less invested in them early on,
Right.
and then go on, regardless of income quartile,
Yeah.
to have much more invested in them later. So
Fascinating.
rich white parents are much less likely to send their kids to tutors, for example, or to have tutors come in than are Asian or Black families.
That's very surprising to me.
Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, big marks on the data. You should have a look.
Fascinating.
And what they say is that, okay, systemic racism means that these people are very rarely in the top quartile.
Yeah.
But because they're trying to make up for their kids having fallen behind slightly in class, maybe, or them having noticed the disparity in input early.
Yeah.
They put these things in place that then become lifelong habits and interactions with education that mean that they then go on to overtake their rich white peers.
Fascinating.
So I guess the individual level things there are, if you find yourself being a poor Black or Asian American and you think, I might put these things in place, do it. It seems to work.
Interesting.
And if you find yourself being a rich white American, careful. The likelihood of complacency caused by that, a lot has been invested early on,
interesting,
means you can get leapfrogged.
So did they separate, I'm just interested, did they separate out people who have emigrated in, or not emigrated, immigrated?
So they didn't they didn't look at first versus second generation immigrants.
Yeah, because I know that really pushes achievement.
Yep. No, they weren't separated.
Okay.
That's in there skewing the numbers.
Okay, yeah.
I'm not entirely sure how you could separate them from the data they've got.
Fascinating.
Anyway, $502,000.
$502,000. Wow.
Okay.
Well, I think the only thing I remember reading from a amazing qualitative anthropological study done a couple of, maybe a decade or even maybe 2 decades ago on American households was that in the US is about 6% of the global child population, and yet they consume 40% of the toys produced each year, which I just find quite mind-boggling.
It's pretty big. Also, you shouldn't be eating that many toys. Terrible. Bad for your microbiome, bad for your teeth. Okay, that's enough news. Also, we've stopped cycling, so it's a little bit quieter here. Gwen, let's talk about our main topic for today. What are we talking about?
We're talking about bellies, Greg.
Perfect. Amazing. What a topic. Okay, what is a belly then?
A belly is the visible part of our abdominal cavity. And I can see the next question is going to be, what is an abdominal cavity, Greg?
How did you know?
We have 2 big cavities in our body. We have the one which we've got our ribs around, that holds our lungs and heart.
Yep.
And we've got the one underneath, which holds our guts, our liver, our spleen, and our other organs. And within that, we've got our pelvic organs as well.
Okay, so the bit of the abdominal cavity that isn't covered by bone. And why isn't it covered by bone? Like, you've got ribs to protect your heart and lungs. Why not have a big plate of bone to protect your guts as well?
Yeah, so ribs, they do protect your heart and lung, which is good because they're very important organs, but they also help us to draw air into our lungs by creating subatmospheric pressure.
They're not protectors, they're levers.
They're levers, but they also have a very important protective function, and often people talk about the protective function of the ribs.
Okay.
Which does mean there is a really good question: why don't we have ribs to protect our guts? Because guts are also very important organs.
Yeah, I like having mine.
Yeah, exactly. Well, imagine we did have ribs all the way down from our top to our pelvis. We wouldn't be able to bend so easily, so we wouldn't be able to move our spine. We wouldn't be able to grow our babies to nearly such a big extent, because if we were growing a baby inside us and we had a fixed cavity, that baby would have to squash organs, either make them smaller or push our diaphragm up or push all of our bladder and bits at the bottom of our pelvis. And we also need to be able to do big movements to change things in our abdomen. So one of the things we need to do, for example, is vomit. It's a very useful way of getting rid of things that can hurt us. In order to do that, you need to be able to very substantially alter the shape of your abdominal cavity in order to vomit, to sneeze,
Piston effect.
to do all sorts of things
So
with your.
Because you folks wanted to do growing babies inside you instead of laying eggs, I have to put up with having no ribs on my stomach.
Yeah, but imagine what it'd be like if you couldn't vomit.
Yeah, no, who wouldn't want to vomit? But I guess there's also I couldn't eat enough food to last 5 days, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So let's just run this the other way then. What would happen if you did have ribs on your abdomen? You'd be looking at trying to do all of those things in a space which is kind of roughly constrained. Your pressures would go through the roof. And for anybody who is familiar with how glaucoma works, that's what happens there. You've got a change in volume that is attempted within a sealed space, raises the pressure, and means that the blood can't get in.
Just let's clarify, what is glaucoma, Greg?
Oh, I see.
know you pick
Who's
me up
picking
with definitions all the time.
Fine. Glaucoma is an issue with the eyeball in which you get too much pressure in the eye. It is normally caused by an occluding of the canal of Schlemm.
Okay, so you're putting more liquid into your eye and it's not getting out.
You're putting the same amount of liquid in your eye, but
it's
less
not getting out. Yeah, okay. Right.
That raises the pressure. That's fine. All the stuff still fits in the eye, but what won't fit in the eye is more stuff, and that more stuff is blood.
Got it.
So the blood, which is meant to be entering the eyeball down the blood vessels, doesn't, or is reduced, and that reduction, even if it's only a small reduction, reduces how much work the eye cells can do before they run out of juice.
Yeah.
And those eye cells do things like seeing. And if you don't have enough blood entering your eye, you can't see, which is why glaucoma eventually makes you blind. So in the abdomen, you would be expecting less blood flow to important organs like the liver, right?
Yeah, but I think also just even to your guts and how your gut moves. So we know that high abdominal pressures increase the risk of constipation, functional gastrointestinal problems, because you literally your guts are not getting enough blood and are not able to move in the right way.
Why do they move?
They move to move the food through them, in effect.
Okay, so there's all that peristalsis and the wiggling.
Yeah,
interesting.
Exactly.
Okay. Which brings us, I guess, back to what happens if you put guts under high pressure and no movement. You get appendicitis.
Yeah, that is true. And there's more on that one in the article. But that's a really extreme form of compression for a short period of time.
Yeah.
But I think the big thrust of the article was what happens when we have compression for longer periods of time.
So why would you have compression for longer periods of time?
Various things in Western cultures can do that. So, for example, clothing is a really obvious one. We like tight waistbands. We like clothes that constrict our movement. And because of the other point that I think we're going to get onto in a moment, because it is harder in our culture to be thin than it is to be fat, often we really favour clothes that hold us in and squeeze our waists.
So that's a clothing thing.
Yep.
What about the fashion side of things?
So, as I alluded to, one of the things about fashion is that the things that are hard to achieve within a cultural context become more desirable.
Sure, that's the core of fashion. The
Core of fashion.
highest heels, the pinkest pinks, and the, I don't know, most ridiculous size waists, I guess.
Exactly. And if we live in a culture like ours, where there's loads of food that makes us deposit fat in unusual places, it becomes increasingly harder to have a waist.
To be clear, when you say unusual places, you're talking about biologically unusual, not uncommon within culture.
No, absolutely not. So in biologically unusual places. So around the organs, within the organs. Changes it when fat is deposited there, it changes the shape of the belly, and it can reduce the visual appearance of a waist and a flat stomach.
Okay, that makes sense, and I can see how that's reflected in clothing and corsetry and all that stuff. What else do people do to give them that fashionable flat belly?
People also hold their abdominals in. They suck their stomach right in. So even if you have a lot more in your abdominal cavity, then if you suck it in, you can push it either up into your ribs or down to your pelvis, as we said. But this becomes a problem when you are always holding your abs really, really tight. because it reduces the amount that your belly can move.
Okay.
And in adults, this is, they talk about hourglass syndrome, and they talk about restricted back movement and the effect on your musculoskeletal system.
Mhm.
But what is especially concerning is that we're seeing increasingly adult fashions being taken up by younger and younger children because they're exposed to an image altered view of human shape.
And this is where things like adult skincare and 6-year-olds.
Exactly.
I mean, I haven't yet seen kids dyeing their hair grey, but it's coming. I know it's coming. All right, fascinating. What is this a long-term problem then, because it does habit damage, or because it changes anything about the physiology that lasts, or is it both?
I would say the biggest problem is the habitual one, is that if you in childhood you learn to always hold your stomach in,
Right.
this makes your abdominal muscles shorter and tighter, which restricts the amount of movements that you can do comfortably. And it means that as you go through life, when there are times that you need your belly to be able to relax, you can't do it because you've got movement patterns that were set in childhood that mean that you are always compressing your organs and restricting your trunk movement.
Fascinating. Okay, fine. So if we are talking about not encouraging kids to develop a habit of pulling in their abs, what are you suggesting they do instead?
I think there are a couple of levers here. One is that if your child genuinely is concerned about the size of their belly,
right,
that's something that you can do something about. Visceral fat deposition in children, so fat that's deposited around and within organs, is something that goes away pretty quickly if you take sugar out of the diet. I'll put a paper in the references.
Okay.
So if you are genuinely concerned that your child has a belly, that maybe they are being bullied, or that you're worried they are going to be, there are things that you can do.
But genuine concern may or may not correlate with genuine visceral adiposity.
Exactly. So the other part of it is that we need to teach children about their bellies, about the functions that they do, about that they are beautiful, that they are things that we can enjoy on ourselves rather than things that we only try and get rid of.
That they stick out for a reason.
That they stick out for a reason occasionally. Yeah.
Interesting. So that's two things then. There's if there's actual fat around the organs, you can clear it out pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. That there's a hearts and minds campaign to be done here to teach kids that it is completely fine to have a belly. That's part of the human experience.
Yeah.
Anything else?
I guess the third one is that I'd never tell children to suck their stomachs in. I think that is a damaging belief and habit to start in childhood.
Fascinating. Okay. Interesting. From my point of view,
mm-hmm.
Also having been a kid that, sucked in my stomach, then is that I wish I'd never had.
Mm-hmm.
I wish I'd known what I know now.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole temptation to just cover up and wear tighter clothes also probably wouldn't have helped me now I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
The whole increasing intra-abdominal pressure through tighter clothes is something we already do too much of as a culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets in there's a reason that 40+% of adults suffer from some form of functional digestive issue.
Mm-hmm.
And this may have something to do with it. Is it worth talking very briefly about the gravity hypothesis of DGBI?
Can do, go for it.
Okay. DGBI, disorders of gut-brain interaction, is the name for the whole collection of things like functional diarrhea and irritable bowel syndrome and GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disorder, which are in some way related to how fast your food is moving through different parts of your gut. There is a well-known reflex in your gut that if you stretch it, it contracts. That's kind of how peristalsis works. So there's food in your gut, that stretches the gut, that means the gut squishes and that moves the food along. That's the whole point. There appears to be some form of regulating system in there where if the gut is hanging properly off the mesentery, or the tissue that's meant to hang the gut into the body, the pull there regulates the speed of stuff going through it. If you take that pull away by, say, compressing the guts into the body by wearing a tight waistband or holding your abs in, they're no longer hanging off the mesentery. They're now being supported from underneath with all this muscle and stuff, or fat. That appears to dysregulate the speed of movement of stuff through the gut, and that may be, and it's quite a good contender for, the overarching mechanism behind a lot of these digestive speed issues, which are incredibly common in Western society and much less common in more traditional cultures, which have less of a you must have no belly at all culture. Anyway, I don't have enough data on that to say it all starts in childhood and it all starts with sucking your belly in, but I also don't have any data that says it doesn't, and mechanistically it wouldn't surprise me. Anyway,
thank you.
that's all right. Thought I'd wrap up. Do we have a listener question?
We do have a listener question.
What is it?
Well, it's very topical given we're currently standing in the sun, but the question is,
Very nice. Quite enjoying it.
I've heard that putting sunscreen on increases your risk of skin cancer more than going out in the sun.
Ooh,
I've
that's
paraphrased slightly.
argumentative. I
It
like
is argumentative. Well, I mean, it is something that I've seen on social media, and I think there are elements that you can see where this belief has come from, because we know that sunscreen protects us against certain types of skin cancer, but the one we're particularly scared of, as sunscreen rates have gone up, the incidence of melanoma has also gone up.
Correct.
And that's where things get really interesting, because what we know is that for the common skin cancers that are less deadly, things like squamous cell carcinoma, blocking UVA and UVB through sunscreen reduces their likelihood.
Right.
But there are various hypotheses as to why the rates of melanoma have gone up even as sunscreen has gone up. And I think the biggest hypothesis is that, in general, the more that you protect yourself in some way, the more likely you are to take risks. So putting on sunscreen certainly seems to increase the risk, increase the chance that people spend more time in the sun.
Man, can you imagine trying to get that out of the data?
Yeah,
The confounders in there must be insane.
massive. But there are other points as well. The data suggests that for about 20-30 years ago, there were certainly compounds in sunscreen that increase oxidative stress on the skin, which can make skin cancer more likely under exposure to UV. The data now from more recent ones suggests that risk is much lower in a more regulated sunscreen market, but certainly that seemed to be part of it. There are other things that have changed at a society-wide level as well. So food consumption, general ill health. I think one of the things that particularly surprised me about skin cancer is that it is also closely linked to diet. So we often tend to think, well, it's all about UV. But actually, if your diet is suppressing your normal ways that you control and prevent cancer, then of course you are more likely to get cancer from any given level of sun exposure.
That's interesting. The thing about melanoma that blows my mind slightly is that it is much, much more common on the trunk, which is the area where you get much, much less sunlight.
Sunscreen. Yeah, exactly. So I think there are various things going on here, and we certainly, there are some things in the data that aren't fully explained.
Yeah.
I don't think it is true to say that the risk of cancer with sunscreen is worse than the risk of cancer with sun exposure, but I would say that relying on sunscreen as the way to manage your sun exposure is necessary in certain situations when you cannot get out of the sun. Yeah. But in general, we favour covering up and seeking shade when it's unpleasant to be in the sun, and using sunscreen only when we need it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think that this answer is so far one-sided. Would it be fair to say that that the benefits from sun exposure should be considered alongside the risks? Yeah. I mean, you're talking about immunoregulation, vitamin D, decreased risk of things like multiple sclerosis, psoriasis, a bunch of others, all of which are reduced in incidence after sun exposure, all of which are increased in incidence, if I have understood the data correctly, and I think I have, if your sun exposure is only while wearing sunscreen.
Yeah.
So the question was clearly about cancer.
Mm-hmm.
If you expand the question to be about health,
Mm-hmm.
it becomes much murkier.
Yeah.
If you contract it and just think about specific types of cancer, you can get a really clear answer.
Yeah.
Do or don't wear sunscreen.
Yeah.
But the further out you step, it becomes much more get a sensible amount of sun.
Yeah.
Do not get burned.
Yes.
That would be my advice.
Yeah, and I think that's actually really important, because that's something that I didn't mention, is that your risk of skin cancer generally is so much worse if you burn.
Mm.
And so, yeah, enough sun, don't get burned. I think that sounds very sensible.
Yeah, that sounds very sensible. For us, that's very sensible. All right, well, this has been fun. You have been listening, alongside various crows and birds and things, to Growing Up Weird with me, Dr. Greg Dickens.
And me, Dr. Gwen Bradbury.
I hope you have a lovely time. Bye.
Bye.